From two beautifully scenic and historic locations, the Hudson Valley, New York, and Willow, Alaska. This is the Sibe Vibe, brought to you by Dogworks Radio. Your hosts are author, journalist, and photographer, the FiveSibes mom, Dorothy Wills Raftery, and Dogworks Radio executive producer, canine behaviorist, trainer, and lead musher of Team Maneke, Robert Forto. The Sibe Vibe is all about the magnificent breed of the Siberian Husky. From training to grooming, and for those who show and breed, from parenting to playing and rescuing Huskies in need, whether mushing over snow-covered trails or lounging on tropical shores, even for Hollywood Sibes on the big silver screen, and so very much more. If it's about a Siberian Husky, we'll chat about it here.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sibe Vibe on Dogworks Radio. I'm your host, Dorothy Wills Raftery, also known as the FiveSibes mom, and I'm calling in from the beautiful scenic Hudson Valley, New York. October is National Animal Safety and Protection Month. While everyday safety of our pets should always be a top priority, it is a good time to go over some safety tips and first aid awareness for our furry best friends. Today, my guest is Tom Rinelli, owner and instructor at Paws N Claws 911 Pet CPR First Aid and Care Training, and that's located in Oakdale, New York. He is also a seasoned veteran of pre-hospital emergency medical services for over 25 years and recipient of the Suffolk County, New York Regional EMS Council's EMS Leadership Award. A lifelong dog lover and owner, Tom has applied his specialized background to educate pet parents, caregivers, rescue volunteers, and first responders, including members of the United States Coast Guard, in life-saving skills and techniques of pet CPR and first aid. To learn more about Tom's work and to sign up for a class near you, please visit his website, and that's at Paws N Claws, that's PawsNClaws911.com. All the resources covered in today's show will be listed over on the show's October 2018 page at dogworksradio.com/the-Sibe-Vibe. Hi, Tom, and welcome to the Sibe Vibe.
Hi, Dorothy. Thanks for having me today.
Now, on your website, you state that there is no 911 for pets, which I certainly wish that we had. Now, I understand you created Paws N Claws 911 to educate and train pet parents, pet care professionals, and those charged with the care of pets, so people will know what to do in an emergency and not feel helpless. Can you tell us what prompted you to take your human emergency training and skills and develop the Paws N Claws programs?
Sure, absolutely. In a word, Jake. That was my boy. That was my golden lab retriever who lives to be 15 years old. He's a two-time cancer survivor. Also was a rescue. I had gotten him in 2004. And briefly, in 2008, he had life-threatening thyroid cancer and went to one of our local critical care emergency vet places. And wonderful place, Long Island Veterinary Specialists. They're known for treating the police canine dogs, so I knew we were in good hands. And they basically went in with a $150,000 laser, one of only 3 in the world, and laser cut the cancer out of his throat. He wound up surviving that and a subsequent bout of cancer, and lived to be 15, happy and healthy. And when I was going through that, my background, as you mentioned, is as a medic for 28 years. I've been a medic and an educator. And I remember sitting there feeling so helpless during surgery because there's a lot of things I do as a medic, and surgery is not one of them. And I sat there and said, man, I feel so helpless. This is terrible. And then I thought, here I am, a guy who knows what to do in an emergency. Well, how does the average pet parent feel? Right. So I speak to a lot of people, both in the human and pet field, when I teach, that say, I had an incident and I felt so helpless. So the whole idea was to empower both pet parents and anyone charged with the care of pets to be able to know what to do in an emergency and not feel helpless.
Now, you teach hands-on training such as CPR, emergency care, bleeding care, shock management, and much more, as well as conducting lecture series, including topics on bloat, seizures, poisonings, allergies, and more. Before we talk more about the trainings, who should consider being trained in pet emergency care and first aid?
Pretty much anyone that either has a pet or is charged with the care of them. So, be it a groomer, or a pet sitter, a walker. I have vet techs come to my class because they want to learn a different side of medicine. And Really, I've had students that don't even have pets that have actually come and taken the class and said, I don't have a pet. However, I think this is such an interesting and important thing to know that I came and took the class. So really anybody that, runs across a pet in their daily life should know how to do this.
Absolutely. Now, while in any emergency, a veterinarian should be contacted, sometimes a situation arises where immediate attention is required. Perhaps someone's out in a rural area with no vet nearby, or it is after hours. In addition to contacting one's vet or ER vet, what are some examples of when a pet may be in need of CPR or first aid?
There's really just a multitude of situations. I mean, pretty much if you can imagine it, it can happen. I always say, they're four-legged furry kids. They get into everything. So, I mean, anything from, they could simply cut their paw while walking. They might just step on a piece of glass. They could have a medical emergency. They could have, a seizure. They could have bloat. They could get into poisoning is a big aspect that we talk about. We talk about how to prevent it and also deal with it. So, I mean, there's a multitude of different things that they could get into. So we just try to basically teach how to, stay calm. That's the key thing. Just stay calm, stay focused, stop and think and say, what do I have to do? What's the situation presenting itself? What do I need to do? And then key thing, as you said, I stress this throughout my classes, take your pet to the vet. This class is not intended to replace the vet. It's not a going to the vet free card. Basically what it does, we fill the gap between the emergency and definitive care. You or I, as humans, if we were ill or injured, would dial 911 and an ambulance would show up. You can't do that with a pet. So what we do here is we teach you skills to mitigate and, in essence, stop the emergency before you get to the vet. So now when you do get to him or her, you can hand him a viable patient.
That's excellent. I know even from personal experience, one of my dogs was an epileptic, and his very first seizure, and that's a whole other story, but his very first seizure was extremely scary. And, of course, I'm on the phone. It's after hours. Everything seems to happen after hours. And I'm calling the emergency vet hospital, and I could remember, one of the things I do actually remember is saying to them, don't you have a pet ambulance, and they're like, no, we don't. So this type of thing is really important. I've since then become very educated in care of course, an epileptic dog. So courses like this are so, so important, I think, for people to help, as you said, fill that gap. Now, with CPR, does it vary according to the size of the pet? And for class, do students learn on simulated animals?
It absolutely varies based on the size of the pet. There are different techniques we teach for all size dogs and cats. You can adapt it to other animals as well, but our class focuses specifically on dogs and cats. And then, yes, they do practice on simulated animals. What makes my training superior, besides the fact that it's hands-on training, it's no PowerPoint or video, and the fact that it's presented with a real-world approach by a medic who's done these things thousands of times, is that every student in my class gets their own demo dog. There's various sizes. I have close to 60 demo dogs, and I actually just encountered this yesterday in a class. I had a student who got trained 4 months ago in a class that was strictly video-based, and she said, wow, I'm impressed. You have dogs for every single student in this class. There was over 20 students yesterday. She said the class I took, they had 2 dogs for the entire class, and you had to stand in line and wait to go up and do the skills. And I said, no, in our class, every student gets a dog or a cat, and you get to do all the skills repeatedly, because that's how we build muscle memory, by doing and repetitive learning. That's the whole basis of my program and why it's superior.
Now, in addition to signing up to become certified in pet first aid, are there some techniques or tips or recommendations that you can share with our listeners?
The key thing is to be prepared and, be proactive. That's the best thing. I always say that they're four-legged furry kids, as I said before. They're going to get into things. You can plan and try to make, pet-proof your house the best you can and whatnot, but there's going to come a point where something's going to happen, so try to be educated. One of the key things that I try to stress is that when you look online, particularly, research who that person is when you're reading an article, because there's a lot of articles out there that spread information, and when you research who's giving the information, sometimes it's just simply a writer. It's not necessarily someone who's a veterinary medical professional. So you have to be careful of that. So just be educated. And another key thing that I always stress is know where to go before you say, 3 o'clock in the morning is not the time to be Googling, where do I take my pet because they just got poisoned. If you should know where to go ahead of time. There are critical care facilities that are 24/7, and you need to know where they are before you have an emergency. Nobody ever wants to think something's going to happen to them, so you need to know in advance. You can have the greatest vet in the world, but 3 o'clock in the morning they're home asleep like you should be. So know where to go before you say, that's a key thing, being prepared.
Right. Excellent points. Now, from toxic plants and shrubs to yard poisons, certain non-pet friendly foods and more, poisoning is something we all are concerned about no matter where our locale. And aside from having poison control hotline numbers handy, which I do have listed on today's show page over at dogworksradio.com under our Sibe Vibe show, what are some things you teach folks to know, be aware of, or do in case of a toxic emergency?
The key thing there that I always stress is, number one, is protect the rescuer. You have to be careful, because if it made them sick, will it make you sick? So we don't want to just rush right in. One of the things that I stress as an example, I like to teach by example, is that if you suddenly heard your neighbor screaming, help, help, and you ran out in the backyard, and their dog was halfway out of the shed, and there was green smoke pouring out above their head, above the door, that's obviously not a situation you belong going into. You're not trained or equipped for that. That's one of those times it's okay to call 911 because that's an emergency that affects humans as well. So you certainly are going to, step back and be careful. The key thing to keep in mind is that you need to contact either pet poison control, which again is available 24/7, 365, or your vet. Pet poison control really is the best bet, because even if you call your vet, they're also going to say, hold on, they're going to call pet poison control because they're a resource. Doesn't mean your vet isn't good. They're great if they know to call a resource, because you can only know so much. Pet poison control is a specialty. A key point to drive home there, because I just heard this recently from someone, is that there's no federal funding for pet poison control. There is for regular human poison control. So the 5 services that are out there, they're all paid services. They charge anywhere from $59 to $69 per incident. Usually gives you unlimited consultation. The vet can contact them and do a consult. So bear that in mind. I recently heard someone on Facebook that was rather angered that she had a pet emergency. She called up and she said, "How dare they charge me? They should just help me." And I certainly wasn't going to get into a keyboard battle with someone, but I wanted to say to her, like, if you knew there's no pet funding, there's no federal funding, you would understand why it's a paid service.
That's excellent.
And they're really a great resource to have.
That's really excellent, because I've heard that question too, so thank you for addressing that. I think that's really key. Yeah, the woman the other day said it, and I said, I wish I could sit down with her and explain that. You understand, your kid 2 or 4-legged is sick and hurt and you want help, but if, once you know that, it's like, oh, okay, well, now I kind of understand. And these services, when you call them, they're not going to just say, hi, this is Pet Poison Control Center, give me your credit card. They explain there's a fee, and they say, while you're going to get your credit card, let me begin to interview you. So it's not like a pay-to-play type of thing, Mm-hmm. They'll help you, but they do have to get paid. So just a key thing to drive home. Some other things real quick with that. You want to secure the packaging, because that can give you good information about, what's in it, what the potential hazards are. There's different things about that. And another key point is to drive home, to keep it short and sweet. Do not induce vomiting unless you're directed to do so by either pet poison control or your vet. Simply because you may not know that the substance, if it burned on the way down, it's going to burn on the way up. You may not know that. So we don't want to just induce vomiting. We have to get that out. We need to stop, call them, consult an expert, and find out what exactly we need to do, and then let them be our guide. Excuse me. Excellent information. Now, I know bloat is scary for humans, too, in a life-threatening situation for a dog where immediacy is critical. What are some of the signs a dog may be experiencing bloat, and are there any things to do to help prevent it? And In addition to getting the dog to the vet, what should one do if they see the signs?
The bloat is actually very scary. Like you said, it's a scary condition. Oftentimes it's not detected early on. It can be, but a lot of times it's... I usually say in my class, what you typically hear, the bad stories when you hear these bad stories is that mom and dad got up in the morning, got ready to go to work. The dog was a little lethargic. Maybe he wasn't eating. And they said, he's just a little cranky. He'll be okay. He'll be fine. And then they leave. They go to work, and they come home 8 hours later. The dog, unfortunately, is near death at that point because they've progressed through the stages of bloat. There's 3 stages. And so the biggest thing is try just to be aware of the signs and then pick up on them. And they can be anything from the dog can be lethargic, they can be excited. Oftentimes you'll see they're attempting to vomit or they're unable to, because as the stomach begins to flip a little bit later on, like in stage 2, it's almost like trying to walk through a door. If you try to walk through a door, but someone shuts the door in your face, is that it's impeding you from going through. If the dog is trying to vomit but nothing's coming up, most likely the stomach is beginning to flip, and it's actually closing off the stomach. So the impetus is there. The brain is saying, hey, get rid of this stuff, get rid of your gastric content, but it can't get it out because it's, in essence, somebody shut the door by twisting the stomach. So you may see later on in the second stage, the abdomen becomes distended. If you tap it, it actually sounds hollow. And then their vital signs can vary, and that's one of the things we teach in the class. The pulse rates initially are going to go up, they're going to compensate, and then later in the stage, third stage, they begin to decompensate because now they've had the blood supply cut off for some time. So it is a survivable thing. The biggest thing is picking up on it early. The recognition is key. My dog, when he had the bloat, he was definitively diagnosed within an hour and a half of onset. So he had, just an outstanding, potential. He was a candidate for surgery. We ultimately chose not to do it just because of some quality of life issues that existed afterwards. But he was, like I say, he was definitively diagnosed in an hour and a half. And a lot of that was largely due to my background because I was able to give them 3 pages of notes about his medical history. But, it definitely helped. And the biggest thing is there's really nothing to do in the field, so to speak. If you notice the signs and you think your dog has bloat, get them to the vet rapidly. Rapid identification and treatment is the key. And again, you may have, maybe 3 o'clock in the morning, so you're not going to go to your normal vet. Know where your critical care facility is, that you can go and, get them help.
Being prepared is key. Now I've been an advocate for canine epilepsy for many years after caring for, as I said, my own dog, which was a Siberian Husky named Gibson, and he was diagnosed with idiopathic epilepsy when he was 3. One of the topics you lecture on is seizures. What tips can you share with our listeners about emergency seizure care, especially for people whose dog has never had a seizure before?
Right. Well, as you know, having been through it, seizures are very, very scary because your dog is just, and honestly, they look like they're possessed, and it's very scary. You look and say, what's going on with my dog? It's a very scary situation. So the key things to remember is that more we want to prevent harm, and that's the key thing. So we want to move the furniture out of the way, because believe it or not, they're going to get more hurt smacking their head on a mahogany coffee table than they are from anything else. We don't want to hold them down. That's a common problem we see with people. They either hold the dog down, or a person on the human side, or they pick them up and they cuddle them, trying to be nice and offer them comfort, and that actually can cause more problems because you could potentially be causing issues with their airway. One of the key things we want to stress, do not put anything in their mouth. Don't put a spoon, a tongue depressor, anything at all. We do not want to do that. What's going to happen is they're going to wind up, their jaws are going to be chomping as part of the seizure. They're going to bite that object, potentially swallow it, have an airway obstruction, and then you have a dog that has a clamped jaw, and you can't reach in to do any maneuvers to get rid of that. So we do not, in any situation, do not want to stick anything in their mouth. The old wives' tale of you can swallow your tongue is just that. It's an old wives' tale. So we do not want to stick anything in there. So we want to just move the furniture, allow them to seize, It usually lasts about 1 to 3 minutes. You want to document the time, the longest 1 to 3 minutes of your life.
Mm-hmm,
and a real good thing you can do, which has become very popular in the vets now, or an advocate of this, is with everybody having a cell phone, pull out your phone, and as hard as it is watching your baby C's, take a video. Because now when you go to the vet and you can show him, it's proof positive the dog had a seizure, and he or she can determine a lot from that. Even on the human side of medicine, with the advocacy of everybody having phones and video, we now come in and often show on the human side, we will show the doctors in the ER the motor vehicle crash or where they fell from, and it gives them so much more information. So the same with this. If you can videotape your dog having that seizure, it gives them a wealth of information to be able to draw from those clues. So that's a big help. And then just maintain their airway and their breathing and circulation. That's something we teach in the class. It's a good reason why to know CPR and in particular rescue breathing. And then remember, on the final note, that when they come out of the seizure, they may be aggressive. You could have the sweetest dog in the world. Remember, they've been oxygen starved for 1 to 3 minutes. So they can be aggressive. So be aware of that. And we actually, the very first skill we teach in our class is emergency muzzling, because as much as you may not want to muzzle your pet, you may have to. So that's something just to keep in mind.
Excellent tips. Thank you. Now, I have a first aid kit for my Huskies. How important is it for pet parents to have a first aid kit at the ready? And what are some of the items that you recommend they have in the kit?
It's definitely something that they should have because, again, being prepared is key. You want to have, you don't want to say, oh, the dog's hurt now. Geez, what do I do now? I don't have anything. What I usually recommend is, while there are pre-made kits that you can buy, certainly there's a bunch of different things on the market. My suggestion, and this is one of the things we teach in the class, it's one of the pages of the handbook that I give out that I wrote, is a breakdown of what should be in your pet first aid kit. And what I stress is that build it based on your own needs. If you're a pet parent with one pet, you'll need basic stuff. If you're a pet walker and you have 4 to 6 dogs at any time, you're going to need more stuff, maybe other different items. There's always the basic everyday stuff you should have, bleeding control items and different things like that. Some things that we teach are just a little out of the ordinary. We'll teach the use of tampons for use in severe bleeding. If you have, say, particularly a pet walker, or even if you're a pet parent, you have 2 dogs and you take a walk, they get into a fight with someone else, you now have, say, in your pack that you were walking, 2 dogs with 11 holes in their chest from from fighting, and then you look down and say, I've got 11 holes and only 2 hands. What do I do? So we actually use the use of tampons if the hole is significantly large, obviously, to place in there, and we use that as a stopgap measure when we're, in essence, outnumbered. So just simple things like that. It's just things that we take from emergency medicine that we use. Some key things you can keep in the kit. Hydrogen peroxide is used to induce vomiting in dogs. It can only be used in dogs. Cats require veterinary medication to induce vomiting. And again, that inducing vomiting is only at the direction of that poison control or your vet. Some over-the-counter medications, a lot of times they'll use that, again, at the discretion of pet poison control. For example, milk and magnesia. You can give that to a pet that's ingested a caustic substance that burns. It will stop the burning process. It will seal off the stomach and prevent that caustic substance from going into the body as a whole and affecting other organs. But again, all these should be used at the discretion of pet poison control. And then a blanket for shock control. That's a shock manager, rather. That's a big one. You can buy the space blankets in the camping aisle for about $4. You look like, if you see the guy on the front of the box, he looks like a baked potato, basically. And those are great. They retain a lot of heat, and we actually use them in our class. They're fantastic. So that's some basics. You can build it to whatever you need for your particular needs. That would be my biggest suggestion.
Now, you also train pet rescuers and even, as we stated earlier, members of our United States Coast Guard. What types of trainings do you teach, and under what circumstances does this help the dogs in need?
Well, it's geared to their particular real-world needs, unique to their particular application. What they particularly like with my training is that I'm one of them. When I taught the Coast Guard, they sought out training, they found me online, they read my background. I spoke to the gentleman who was coordinating, and he was one of the canine handlers. And after hearing my background, not only am I a medic and an educator, I also have worked in very busy, high-crime, high-call volume response areas throughout New York, including New York City. And they like the fact that I'm one of them, that I understand the real world as it is on the emergency service side. It's a very different thing than, you see in a video or if you're acting as a civilian responder. So they like that part of it. I gear it, again, to their specific environment. We do training that mimics what they're going to encounter in the field. Prime example, we do hands-on scenario-based skills challenges. We trained the Delaware State Animal Response Team. They contracted with me back in April. We went down there and trained about 30 members of their team, and we set up a scenario with them. We made a weather emergency that they could have, had a tornado went to a trailer park, per se. We gave them multiple injured patients with multiple injuries, being amputations, impalements, other things of that nature, and had wind involved and sound effects, and really made it geared towards them. So we train a lot of different first responders, everybody from firefighters and EMS, following a house fire where they had a victim that was a pet. We've trained, Coast Guard where they have a remote military application. As I said, we trained both Delaware State Animal Response Team. I'm training Hunterdon County, New Jersey's CART, Community Animal Response Team. So there's a lot of different places that we deal with. Animal control officers. Everybody has their own little unique environment, so we gear it to their exactly what they need. So that's what makes our training superior for them, that it's someone who understands their needs, who's been there, done that, and has walked in their shoes. So that's what makes our training different.
Absolutely. And actually, it really is a good point, because even though you're located in New York, you do bring trainings and classes all over where it's needed. Is that correct?
That is correct. I'm based in Long Island, New York, and I train in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, and beyond. Those are the places I've been so far. We get calls all the time. We're constantly expanding. We're always going somewhere, so we're always willing to travel. There's some student minimums and things involved, but we're willing to travel. If people are looking for the training, we're willing to take the ride.
Now, you also offer fundraising program for organizations and rescues, etc. And I think this is a really amazing way to not only train folks in pet CPR and first aid and safety, but also to help these organizations that really do need assistance with all what they do. Can you tell us really briefly about that in case someone who is listening is interested in organizing one?
Sure. About 85% of my classes are actually structured that way. The remaining are geared towards, again, first responders, private classes that I'll do sometimes for individuals or companies. And it's a very popular fundraising option for simple reasons that it's a simple, effective, and unique fundraiser. It doesn't require a labor, cost, or material-intensive effort, which is great for a small rescue group, per se, because you have volunteer members who are already time-strapped. They volunteered their time to help pets, and now they say, well, geez, I don't really have time to run this really super-duper involved fundraiser. This one, all they have to do is provide the host location, which can be as simple as a firehouse meeting room, a church basement, things of that nature, and they promote the class, which I give them all the materials and support for, and I handle everything else. I do all the registration and payments for my website. I'm available 7 days a week till 10 p.m. to field any questions potential students may have. And the day of the class, I write them a check for what they earn. And they earn about 25% of the class. With up to 40 students in the class, they can earn up to $600 per class. So if the average rescue group or it's used for any nonprofit group. It doesn't have to be pet-related. It typically is for obvious reasons. But we've done everybody from rescue groups to dog clubs. I just did a dog park yesterday, a new dog park. They trained a bunch of their members, and then the money went back to the dog park. We've had fire departments, ambulance corps, cancer support groups. And the nice thing is it also, once you get people in, they go back and tell their friends and family and whatnot, and you automatically create the potential for another fundraiser, a successful fundraiser. The class yesterday, before I even left, booked me for May of next year. They want me to come back and do another class. The class yesterday was so successful. So, again, it's just a real simple, easy, effective, and unique. It's not, nobody else has done this. It's not another paint night. It's not another psychic night. It's something really different that pulls everybody in. Everybody has a pet or knows someone who does. So it's a huge target market.
Absolutely. And, of course, I knew we'd be running out of short on time because we have so many things to cover, but I do understand you also offer programs for Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts to earn a merit badge for pet care. I think that's really cool. Can you just briefly tell us a little bit about that? And I know all this information folks can get from your website, which we will have listed on our page. And again, it's PawsNClaws911 and .com. But yeah, can you just tell us a little bit about that program for the troops?
Right. I built the class. It's an hour long, and I built it to teach them the basics per their curriculum for the merit badge. So some of the quick things that we cover is emergency muzzling, safe approach to an injured animal, wound care, different things like that, and we keep it real short and sweet based on what they need for the merit badge. And then if they want additional training, they obviously can, work with us to get more training, but that usually covers what the kids need. And we've actually done a class already for a scout trip. It was very, very successful.
Excellent. Now, Tom, if there was one overall message that you would want to leave our listeners about the importance of learning emergency pet care, CPR, first aid, what would it be?
And my biggest thing I could tell them is be prepared. No one ever expects or thinks an emergency with their pet or even, on the human side, will ever happen. So the biggest thing is get trained, know what to do, stay calm. That sounds easier said than done. But when you have the skills, we teach you the skills. We teach muscle memory in our training through hands-on training. We build skills that when something happens, you say, oh, my God, what do I do? And it kicks right in. You take a breath, and we teach you, say, just take a breath, say, I got this, look at the situation, and you deal with it. So the biggest thing is be prepared and go from there, and everything will get better.
Tom, thank you so very much for being my guest today on the Sibe Vibe here on DogWorks Radio and sharing your expertise and all your excellent tips with our audience. And to our listeners, all the links to Tom's website, FiveSibes, the Poison Control, all of that information and resources will be listed over on this episode's page at dogworksradio.com/the-Sibe-Vibe. You can also download all of our episodes and subscribe to future ones. For iPhone and iPad users, simply open up the podcast app and search for the Sibe Vibe on DogWorks Radio, or you can check us out on iTunes, and you'll be able to download this show so that you can keep it for future use as well as our others. And I just want to thank everyone for tuning in to today's episode of the Sibe Vibe, and we'll be back next month to talk about dogs living full lives with canine epilepsy during November's Epilepsy Awareness Month. Thanks again, Tom. I really appreciate having you on air.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everybody. Until next month. Bye-bye.